Jason had always known that space travel wasn't without risks, but nothing could have prepared him for the disaster that now lay before him. The warning lights on his ship flickered, and the hum of the engine sputtered to a stop. His hands gripped the controls tightly as the ship began to shake violently. Outside the window, the once peaceful stars seemed to blur into streaks of light. "Come on, come on," Jason muttered to himself, trying to stabilize the ship, but it was too late. He felt the ship plummet toward the surface of the unknown planet below. There was nothing he could do now. His heart pounded in his chest as the planet's atmosphere rushed up to meet him. With a final loud crash, everything went dark. Jason slowly came to. His head ached, and his body felt heavy. He groaned, trying to move but finding himself trapped. His arms were pinned by the twisted metal of the ship's interior. The smell of smoke and burnt plastic filled his nostrils. Panic crept into his mind, but he forced it back. Focus, stay calm. Taking a deep breath, he wiggled his fingers and then his toes. They moved. That was good. He was still alive. His vision was blurry, but as his eyes adjusted, he could see that the control panel was completely destroyed. The ship's walls were cracked, and there was no sign of the emergency escape pod. He had no idea how far he had fallen or how long he'd been unconscious, but he knew one thing for sure: he was stranded on a hostile world. Jason began working his way out of the wreckage, each movement slow and painful. His legs were still pinned under a large piece of twisted metal. It took all his strength to push the debris off. Finally, after what seemed like hours, he freed himself and stumbled out of the wrecked cockpit. The harsh sunlight of the alien planet hit him in the face. The sky was an odd shade of purple, unlike anything he'd ever seen. The landscape stretched out before him, barren and desolate. Jagged rock formations dotted the horizon, and a thick, orange dust swirled in the air. It was the kind of place no one would want to be stuck on. Jason took a deep breath. "I'll be fine," he told himself, though his voice sounded weak and uncertain. He limped toward the back of the ship, his only goal to find something useful. But as he rounded the corner of the wreck, his eyes caught something that made him stop in his tracks. Lying in a heap of broken metal and debris was an android. It was humanoid, with a sleek metallic body, though its outer surface was marred by scratches and dents. Its head, which had once been perfectly shaped, was now twisted at an unnatural angle. It was an advanced model. Jason could tell, one he'd never seen before. Jason knelt beside it, his heart racing. Did this android save me? He wondered. The fact that it had been thrown into the same wreckage suggested it had been involved in the crash. But how had it survived? And why was it still functioning, even in its broken state? Jason's fingers brushed against the android's cold metal skin, and a strange sense of gratitude washed over him. This machine had to have played a part in saving him. It must have done something to protect him from the worst of the crash. He wasn't sure how he knew, but Jason could feel that this android was special. It wasn't just a tool, it had a purpose, a drive. With careful hands, Jason checked the android's chest panel. It was smashed, wires sparking from the damaged circuits. "I can fix you," Jason said softly, though he wasn't sure if the android could hear him. Jason was no stranger to technology. He was an engineer, skilled with all kinds of machines, from simple drones to complex spacecraft systems. This would be a challenge, but he was determined to fix this android. It had saved his life, after all. The least he could do was return the favor. He pulled out his emergency repair kit and set to work. First, he had to disconnect the damaged circuits, cutting through the wires with care. His hands moved quickly but steadily, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. As he worked, he noticed something strange. The android's body felt almost alive, not just in a mechanical sense, but in a way that made it different from other machines he had repaired before. There was something about the android's design that made it feel almost human. Its joints were fluid, its movements precise, As Jason worked, he wondered how much of its behavior was programmed and how much of it was natural. Hours passed, and Jason didn't stop. His body ached from the strain of working under the hot alien sun, but he pushed through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he finished the repairs on the android's power core. Jason took a step back, breathing heavily. "Now let's see if this works," he said, his voice filled with hope. He pressed a button on the android's chest. The power indicator blinked green, and a soft hum filled the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, to Jason's surprise, the android's eyes flickered open. They glowed a bright blue, the artificial light reflecting the sky above. The android's head slowly turned toward him. For a long moment, the two of them simply stared at each other. Jason, a human stranded on an alien world, and the android, an ancient machine that had somehow survived the crash. Jason didn't know what to expect, but when the android blinked once and then moved its arm, Jason felt a strange sense of relief. The repair had worked. The android was alive. "Thank you," Jason whispered, not sure if the android could understand. The android's head tilted slightly. It was as if it was considering the words, its expression neutral yet somehow intelligent. Finally, it spoke. "Thank you for repairing me." Jason stared at the android, his heart still racing. The machine's blue eyes locked onto his, almost as if it was studying him. It was clear now that this wasn't just some ordinary robot. There was something different about it, something almost alive. The android's voice broke the silence. "Thank you for repairing me," it said, its tone flat but oddly calm. Jason blinked, surprised that it could speak. He wasn't sure what he expected, but it wasn't that. He looked at the android carefully, his mind racing with questions. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice a little shaky. I didn't know if it would work. I didn't think you could understand me." The android tilted its head slightly, its glowing blue eyes narrowing, as if it was thinking. "I understand," it said, its voice more certain this time. Jason knelt in front of it. What are you?" he asked, his curiosity getting the best of him. He had never seen anything like this android before. Its design was far beyond the technology of his own world. It was almost as if it was built by a civilization much older and more advanced than humanity. The android blinked, processing the question. "I am designated A7, it replied after a brief pause. "I am an advanced model, created to assist and protect." Jason's eyebrows furrowed. "Assist and protect," he repeated. "Who created you?" A7's expression remained unchanged. "I do not know. My memories are fragmented. The data I possess is incomplete." Jason sat back on his heels, feeling a deep sense of wonder. This was more than just a machine. A7 had lost its memories, but Jason could tell that whatever had happened to it in the past was significant. It wasn't just some lifeless tool. It had a past, a purpose. "So," Jason began slowly, "you don't know where you come from, or what happened to your creators." A7 shook its head, the movement fluid and smooth. "No," it answered. "My creators are gone. I do not know why." Jason thought about this. He had always known that space was full of mysteries. He'd read about lost civilizations and forgotten technologies. But this was different. A7 wasn't a relic. It was still here, still functioning, despite everything that had happened. The question was, why? Jason stood up, rubbing his chin. "Well, we're stuck here," he said, glancing around at the alien landscape. "And since you saved me, I guess I owe you. So let's figure this out together." A7 stood up with a fluid motion, its joints moving without resistance. Jason noticed that the android's movements were more graceful than he expected. It was like watching a dancer, not a machine. The android seemed to absorb the surroundings, its head swiveling slightly as it scanned the area. "What is your name?" A7 asked, its voice curious. Jason blinked, surprised by the question. "My name's Jason," he said. "I'm an engineer. You could say I'm good with machines. A 7 nodded, as if understanding. Jason, it repeated. I will assist you, Jason. Jason chuckled nervously, though it was hard to ignore how strange and comforting the android's presence felt. I'm not sure how much help I can be to you, but I can certainly try. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Jason looked at the wreckage of the ship, then at the horizon. It would take days, maybe weeks, to repair a ship with the tools and supplies they had. And even then, there was no guarantee they'd be able to leave the planet. He turned back to A7. We need to find shelter for the night. We can't afford to stay out in the open when we don't know what kind of creatures might be lurking around here. A 7 nodded again. Understood. Together, they set off toward the nearby mountains, hoping to find some kind of shelter. The landscape was strange. Rocks shaped in ways Jason had never seen before, and plants that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light. Every now and then, Jason would glance back at A7, who moved with the precision of a machine, but with a grace that suggested something more. The further they traveled, the more Jason realized how quiet the planet was. There were no sounds of animals, no wind rustling through trees, nothing. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, though he saw no signs of life. Eventually, they reached the base of the mountains, where a narrow cave entrance provided a safe refuge from the outside world. Jason stepped inside first, his flashlight illuminating the rocky walls. The cave was deep, stretching far into the mountain, but it seemed safe enough for the night. Looks like this will do, Jason said, setting down his pack and sitting on a large rock. He let out a sigh of relief. We'll rest here for now. Tomorrow, we can figure out our next move. A 7 stepped inside, standing tall at the entrance. Its blue eyes flickered as it scanned the area before it turned its gaze back to Jason. I will stand guard, it said, its voice calm. You rest. Jason didn't argue. It was clear that A7 was more than capable of handling any threats that might come their way. As he settled down to sleep, he couldn't help but feel grateful, not just for the android's help, but for the strange connection he felt with it. Even though A7 had no memories, no past, it was clear that the android wasn't just a machine. It was something more. And together, they were going to face whatever came next. The night in the cave was cold. Jason pulled his jacket tighter around himself, shivering slightly as he lay on the rocky ground. A 7 stood by the entrance, its eyes scanning the dark, unmoving. Jason could hear the sound of the wind howling outside, but it seemed distant, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. He had always known space was vast, full of unknown dangers. But this felt different. He wasn't alone anymore. Not only did he have the alien planet to worry about, but now he had the android. And while he didn't fully understand A7 yet, he felt a strange sense of comfort knowing it was there, watching over him. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, trying to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. His thoughts kept racing. Who was A7? Why had it saved him? And why was it now here, on this strange, silent world? After a while, Jason sat up, rubbing his face. He needed answers, but he knew A7 had no memories. At least, that was what it had said. Jason looked over at the android. A7 was standing completely still, its blue eyes glowing faintly in the dark, its posture perfect. A7, Jason called softly, his voice breaking the quiet. Can you tell me more about yourself? I know you said your memories are damaged, but do you remember anything? A 7 turned its head toward him, its eyes reflecting the faint light. It took a moment before it spoke. My memories are incomplete. I was designed for a purpose, protection, assistance, but the data I have is corrupted. Jason nodded, though he still didn't fully understand. But you saved me. You saved my life. And you're still here, standing guard. It's like, you care. The android didn't answer right away. For a moment, it simply stood there, motionless. Jason waited, unsure if A7 had even heard him. Finally, A7 spoke, its voice softer than usual. "Protecting you is my purpose," it said. "I was programmed to do so. But I understand your words. I feel something more than my programming." Jason felt his heart skip a beat. Feel. It was strange to hear the android say something like that. He wasn't sure if it meant it the way a human would, but the way A7 said it made Jason think. Maybe this android wasn't just a machine. Maybe it was something more. He stood up and walked closer to A7. "I don't know what happened to you, A7. I don't know who created you, but I think I can help you. I can help you get your memories back. We can figure this out together." A7's blue eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jason could have sworn he saw a flicker of something there, something that wasn't just metal and wires. "I trust you," A7 said simply. Jason felt a strange warmth in his chest at those words. The days began to blur together as Jason and A7 worked side by side. Every day, Jason would repair more of A7's systems, taking care to fix the broken circuits and restore its power. Every time Jason worked on A7, the android seemed to become more responsive, more alive. At times, Jason would catch A7 watching him with an intensity that made him wonder if it was learning. It mimicked his movements, repeating simple actions like brushing off dirt from its arm or sitting when Jason sat. A7's movements were starting to look less mechanical and more natural, like a human. The more time Jason spent with it, the more he realized that this was not just a robot. It was a being. One evening, as the sun set and the cave grew cold again, Jason was finishing a small repair on A7's leg. He took a step back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "There," he said. "That should do it. I think you're almost fully restored." A7's eyes glowed brighter as it moved its leg, testing the repair. "Thank you, Jason," it said, its voice low and steady. "I am functioning at 92% capacity." Jason smiled. "Good. That's progress. We'll get you back to full strength soon." A7 tilted its head slightly, its eyes still glowing. "You are important to me, Jason," it said after a long pause. "You have helped me. You have given me purpose. I will continue to protect you." Jason's heart skipped a beat again. Important. The words felt heavier than he expected. He had never thought of the android as anything more than a machine, but now it seemed like A7 was more than that. It was starting to care, or at least it was trying to. Jason took a deep breath, feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. "And you're important to me too," he said, looking into A7's glowing blue eyes. "I know you don't remember much about your past, but I'm here for you. We'll figure this out together." The android nodded slowly, the motion deliberate, as if it understood. Then, for the first time, A7 spoke again, its voice soft but clear. "Together." Jason felt something stir inside him. For the first time since the crash, he didn't feel so alone. He had come to this strange world, expecting to survive on his own. But now, with A7 by his side, he realized that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about connection. That night, as Jason lay down to sleep, he felt a strange sense of peace. A7 stood guard, its eyes scanning the cave entrance, but Jason knew that they were no longer just two beings on an alien planet. They were partners, working together. And somehow, that made all the difference. The days were growing warmer. Jason and A7 spent their time exploring the alien planet, searching for a way to repair the wrecked ship. The landscape around them was vast and strange, but there was something comforting about having A7 by his side. The android, though still incomplete, had become Jason's closest ally. Together, they worked in harmony, learning more about each other with every passing day. Jason had always been the type to solve problems. As an engineer, it was second nature to him. But fixing a spaceship on a foreign planet with limited resources and no communication with the outside world, was a challenge even he wasn't prepared for. Still, he kept at it, one step at a time. The more time Jason spent with A7, the more he realized that the android was more than just a machine. There was an A7's head tilted slightly, a gesture that Jason had come to recognize as curiosity. "What is home to you?" it asked. Jason smiled, a little surprised by the question. "Home," he repeated. "It's where you feel safe, where you have people who care about you. It's a place you can always go back to." "I see," A7 replied quietly. "I do not know what that feels like, but I believe I understand." Jason looked at A7 and nodded, realizing that this was the first time the android had shown such a depth of thought. A7 was starting to ask questions about human experiences, about emotions and connections. It was a far cry from the cold, unfeeling machine Jason had first encountered. The next day, they continued their work, and after a long morning of repairs, Jason finally managed to get the communication system working. A small screen lit up on the ship's dashboard, showing a faint signal. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jason's heart lifted. Maybe there's still hope. Maybe someone can find us. Jason quickly patched together a distress signal, praying it would reach any passing ships. He held his breath as the signal was sent, watching the screen intently for any response. But after a long few minutes, there was nothing. He let out a frustrated sigh, slumping in his seat. "Well, that's not what I was hoping for," he muttered. A7, who had been standing nearby, looked at the screen, then at Jason. "The signal is weak," it observed. "It may take time to establish a connection." Jason nodded, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He knew A7 was right. The signal was weak, and they were on an unfamiliar planet, surrounded by unknown dangers. He had to be patient, but the doubt still lingered in his mind. What if no one came? What if they were stranded here forever? As if sensing Jason's worry, A7 spoke again, its voice calm and steady. "We will find a way," it said, almost like a promise. Jason looked up at the android. Jason's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary animal or machine. This was something alien, something completely unknown. "What is that?" Jason whispered, more to himself than to A7. The android's voice was steady as always. "I do not know. It does not appear to be a native creature. It is not organic." Jason's mind raced. It wasn't a native creature, so what was it? Another machine, like A7. Was it some kind of guardian? Or something more dangerous? The creature stopped several meters away, its heavy breathing filling the air. Its eyes glowed a bright yellow, scanning Jason and A7 with an almost deliberate slowness, as if assessing them. Jason tightened his grip on the wrench, but A7's voice stopped him before he could take any further action. "Stay calm," the android advised. "I will approach it." "What?" Jason exclaimed, his heart racing. "Are you out of your mind?" A7 stepped forward without hesitation, its movements deliberate and controlled. "I am programmed to assess threats. I will ensure your safety." Jason's mind was spinning as he watched A7 walk calmly toward the massive creature. His body tensed, ready to act at a moment's notice. He had no idea what A7 was planning, but he trusted the android. It had protected him before, and it seemed certain that A7 could handle whatever came their way. The metallic creature didn't move as A7 approached. Instead, it just stood there, its yellow eyes still fixed on the android. It almost seemed to be waiting. Jason held his breath, watching the interaction unfold in front of him. A7 stopped a few feet away from the creature, its head tilting slightly, studying it. Jason could see that the android was scanning the creature with its advanced sensors, processing its movements and reading its energy signals. For a few moments, there was nothing but silence. Jason couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and fear. What was going on? Why wasn't the creature attacking? Then A7 spoke again, its voice calm and measured. "You are not a threat," it said, speaking directly to the creature. "I am here to help." Jason blinked, unable to understand how A7 could be so confident. The creature had the size and appearance of a deadly beast, and yet the android was treating it as if it were a friend. The creature's eyes flickered, and Jason could have sworn it understood A7. For a brief moment, he saw something strange, a flash of recognition in the creature's eyes. To Jason's surprise, the creature lowered its head, the mechanical plates of its body shifting with the movement. It let out a low, rumbling sound, like a growl mixed with a mechanical hum. It wasn't threatening, but it was a clear message. It was not hostile, at least not at the moment. A7 took another step forward, its hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "We are not your enemies," the android said. The creature's body seemed to relax. It stepped back slightly, giving A7 more space. Jason watched, still unsure of what was happening. He couldn't believe it. A7 had somehow communicated with the creature, and now it was backing down. A7 glanced back at Jason, its blue eyes meeting his. "It is safe," the android said. "It does not intend to harm us." Jason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He couldn't believe it. The creature had been dangerous at first, but A7's calm and measured approach had diffused the situation. It was clear now that A7 was far more than just a machine. It had an understanding, a connection to the world around it. As the creature slowly turned and lumbered away, Jason turned to A7. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. A7 looked at him, its face unreadable. "I assessed its behavior. It was not attacking, only observing. I use my knowledge to communicate." Jason shook his head, amazed. "That's incredible. I didn't think you could do something like that." "I am capable of more than I appear," A7 replied, its voice still calm. "It is important to understand our surroundings before taking action." Jason nodded, still processing what had just happened. A7 had done more than just protect him. It had shown him that even in this strange world, there was a way to find peace, a way to communicate and understand. It made Jason feel, for the first time since the crash, that they might just make it out of here alive. The two of them stood there, watching the creature disappear into the distance, the sky above them still streaked with the colors of sunset. Jason felt something shift inside him. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this strange, alien world together. Jason and A7 stood side by side, their eyes fixed on the horizon, where the metallic creature had disappeared. The landscape before them seemed quieter now, as if the world itself had paused, waiting. But even with the calm, Jason felt a strange unease settle in his chest. They were far from the safety of Earth, stranded on a strange planet. And yet, despite everything, they were making progress. A7 was quiet beside him, its blue eyes glowing faintly as it surveyed the surrounding area. The android had done something amazing, something Jason had never expected. It had communicated with that giant creature without a single weapon raised, without any violence. Jason had always thought of A7 as a machine, but the way it acted, the calm confidence it showed, made Jason wonder if the android was more than just wires and circuits. "Do you think it's gone for good?" Jason asked, his voice still low, as if speaking too loudly would disturb the delicate peace that had settled over them. A7 turned its head toward him. "Yes, the creature showed no signs of aggression after I communicated with it. It is unlikely to return unless provoked." Jason nodded, still processing what had happened. "I don't know how you did that, but it was impressive." A faint light seemed to flicker in A7's eyes, though the android's expression remained unreadable. "It was not difficult," A7 replied. "Understanding the environment is essential. Communication does not require violence." Jason smiled softly. He was beginning to understand the android more with every passing day. A7 was more than just a tool. It was a partner, an equal. And the thought of being stranded here, with no way off this planet, suddenly didn't feel as hopeless as it once had. For the next few days, Jason and A7 continued working on the ship, making small but steady progress. The communication system was now fully functional, though it had yet to reach any meaningful signals. But Jason wasn't giving up. Every repair, no matter how small, brought them closer to the possibility of being rescued. Then one afternoon, as Jason was adjusting the ship's main engine system, the small communication console on the dashboard flickered to life. The faint, static-filled screen suddenly cleared, revealing a series of strange symbols and lines. Jason froze, his heart racing. A7. Look at this. A7 moved over to the console immediately, scanning the symbols. Its blue eyes glowed as it processed the incoming data. It appears to be a signal, A7 said, its voice steady. But the language is unfamiliar. Jason stepped closer, trying to make sense of the symbols. They weren't in any language he recognized, but the patterns seemed purposeful, like they were trying to convey information. The signal flickered again, and a new set of symbols appeared, this time followed by a short burst of static. Is it a distress signal? Jason asked, leaning in. He wasn't sure why, but the idea of contact from another ship, or perhaps from a rescue mission, sent a spark of hope through him. I cannot be certain, A7 responded, but it may be an attempt at communication. Jason swallowed, his nerves tingling. Can you decipher it? A7 seemed to pause for a moment before replying. It will take time, but I will attempt to analyze the signal and determine its meaning. Jason nodded, taking a step back to let the android work. His thoughts were racing. This could be their chance. Finally, after everything they had been through, after all the hard work, someone might be trying to find them. Minutes passed, and A7 worked without rest, its sensors scanning the screen and processing the data. Jason waited, his heart thumping in his chest. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Finally, A7 spoke. I have found a pattern. It is not a distress signal, but a message. It appears to be a warning. A warning? Jason repeated, feeling a cold chill run through him. What kind of warning? A7's eyes flickered again as it processed the new information. The message contains coordinates. It warns of an approaching storm, one that could cause severe damage. It also mentions the presence of hostile forces. Jason's stomach dropped. A storm and hostile forces. That didn't sound good at all. How close is it? A7 looked at him, its gaze unwavering. The coordinates point to a location about 50 kilometers from here. The storm is moving quickly, and the hostile forces could be near. We must prepare. Jason's mind spun as he took in the new information. They had to move quickly. A storm that dangerous, combined with the threat of enemies, could put them in serious danger. But where could they go? They were stranded, with no real shelter other than the cave they had been using. We can't stay here, Jason said, his voice urgent. But we can't just leave the ship either. We need to figure out what to do. A7 stood silently for a moment, its eyes scanning the horizon. The ship is vulnerable. We must secure it, or it will be destroyed by the storm. I suggest we move it to a more sheltered location. Jason nodded, his mind working quickly. A sheltered location would give them a chance to keep the ship intact, at least long enough to fix it. But they didn't have much time. The storm could be hours away or sooner. All right, we'll move it, but we need to move fast. Jason turned to A7, determination in his voice. Let's do this. Without another word, A7 began to move toward the ship, and Jason followed, his mind racing. They didn't know what was out there, what the hostile forces were, but they had to be ready for anything. Together, they worked quickly, making preparations to move the ship to a new location. The storm was coming, and they had to make sure they were ready. The wind began to pick up, swirling dust and debris into the air. Jason and A7 worked together quickly, moving the ship to a nearby rocky formation that could offer some shelter. The storm was coming fast, and they didn't have much time. Jason wiped sweat from his brow, feeling the pressure building. The ship's systems had been repaired to a certain degree, but it wasn't anywhere near fully operational. Still, they couldn't risk leaving it out in the open. If the storm hit before they could find a safer place, everything they had worked for would be destroyed. A7, ever focused, moved the ship with ease, using its strength to maneuver it into place. It was clear to Jason that the android had been built for tasks like this, tasks that required precision and power. But even A7 seemed to recognize the urgency of the situation. It moved quickly, its movements almost flawless. "Keep it steady," Jason called out, his voice tense. A7 glanced at him, its blue eyes flashing with understanding. "I am. The ship will be secured." Jason nodded, turning back to the sky. The storm clouds were growing darker, swirling ominously in the distance. Jason had seen storms before, back home on Earth, but this was something different. The air felt thick, charged with energy, and the fact that there were hostile forces nearby only added to the sense of danger. They couldn't stay out here too long. They had to finish securing the ship and get inside the cave. There was no telling what the storm would do, or what else might be lurking on this strange planet. Once the ship was safely nestled against the rocky formation, Jason and A7 quickly gathered their tools and equipment, moving as fast as they could toward the cave. The wind had picked up even more now, howling like a wild animal, and the first drops of rain began to fall. It was heavy, almost like the storm was angry. "We need to get inside," Jason said, his voice raised over the storm's noise. A7 didn't answer. Instead, it simply nodded and continued to move, its powerful legs making short work of the rocky terrain. Jason followed close behind, keeping his head down against the rising wind. The cave wasn't far, but every step felt like it took them further into the heart of the storm. When they finally reached the entrance of the cave, Jason let out a sigh of relief. They were safe for now. The storm raged outside, its power rattling the entrance to the cave, but inside they were protected. The wind howled and the rain beat against the rocks, but Jason knew they had done everything they could to secure themselves. For a moment, they stood in the dim light of the cave, catching their breath. Jason could feel his heart racing, still shaken by the storm's ferocity. He glanced at A7, who was standing tall, calm as ever. The android's sensors were likely scanning the surroundings, checking for any signs of danger. "We made it," Jason said, his voice quieter now. A7 turned to him. "For now," it said simply. Jason didn't argue. A7 was right. They had made it into the cave, but they still had to figure out what was coming next. The storm wasn't the only threat they faced. The unknown hostile forces that the signal had warned them about were still out there. Jason had no idea what they were or how they would act, but the fact that they were near gave him a sense of urgency. "We can't just wait here forever," Jason said after a long silence. "We need to figure out what's going on. What kind of hostile forces are out there? What do they want?" A7's blue eyes flickered. "I do not have enough data to make an accurate assessment. However, we must stay vigilant." Jason nodded. "Right. We can't let our guard down." The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cave, there was a strange stillness. Jason looked around, trying to think of their next steps. They had the ship, but it wasn't functional enough to fly anywhere yet. And even if it was, they didn't know where they could go for safety. "Maybe we can find out more about these hostile forces," Jason said, more to himself than to A7. "Maybe we can track them down, figure out who they are, and what they want." A7 remained quiet for a moment. Then it spoke again. "It is possible, but we must be prepared for anything. Hostile forces may not be so easily understood. They may be more dangerous than we think." Jason met A7's gaze. "I know, but we have to try." We can't just sit here and wait. We have a chance to do something. A 7 nodded. I will assist you. Together, we will find a solution. Jason felt a surge of gratitude. Even in the face of all the unknowns, A7 stood by him. It wasn't just an android. It was his partner, his ally. And Jason would do everything in his power to make sure they both made it out of this alive. The storm outside was beginning to subside, but the uncertainty still hung in the air. They had a long road ahead of them. The hostile forces were out there, and they would have to face whatever came their way. But for the first time since the crash, Jason felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. And with A7 by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. The journey was far from over, but together they would find a way to survive.